Three, two, one. Microphone test. Microphone test. Recording in progress.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this local plan meeting. I'm Martin Goss. I'm the chair of the local plan. The meeting is being audio streamed and will be available to listen to again after the meeting. We'll also be live streaming the meeting as a test of the equipment and its functionality, which will be available to view on YouTube following the meeting. To begin with, as always, there are some housekeeping matters. In the event of an emergency, there are no practice fire alarms planned for the evening. So if you hear a fire alarm, please evacuate the town hall by going down the main staircase or the back staircase to the high street and then to the car park behind the town hall in St Rumwald Street. We have a short break at 8 p.m. subject to progress of business this evening. Hopefully we may conclude by then. And please, would all speakers use the microphones at all times and speak directly into the microphone, and would participants please mute the microphones when not speaking. So we'll start with introductions. So I've introduced myself and we'll go left round the table and up that way back, please.
I'm Councillor Kaylee Rippingale, representing Newtown and Christchurch and Deputy Chairperson for the local plan.
Councillor Sam McLean, representing Newtown and Christchurch.
Councillor Richard Taylor, representing Castle Ward.
Councillor Tracy Arnold, representing Stanway Ward.
Councillor Patricia Moore, Mersey and Pyfleet Ward.
Councillor William Sunnox, representing Rural North Ward.
Councillor Darius Laws, here tonight, substituting for Councillor Lewis Barber.
Councillor Julie Young, substituting for Councillor Jocelyn Law and representing Greenstock Ward.
Simon Cairns, Development Management.
Sandra Scott, Place Strategy Manager. Karen Syrett, Lead Officer for Planning and Place Strategy.
Robert Carmichael, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you. We've dealt with substitutions. We've got two apologies where there are no substitutions. We've got Councillor Smith and Councillor Oxford. We've got no urgent items. And are there any declarations of interest anybody needs to announce this evening relating to anything on the agenda? No, that's fine, thank you. And then the next piece of business is for members to look at the two sets of meetings, which were the 25th of May and the 13th of June, to just confirm that you believe they are a true public record. Is anyone going to raise any concerns, or are you happy that they are accurate? It was a long meeting, the last one, so everyone's happy, right? Okay, that is unanimous, so I can sign those as chair shortly. And then we move on to item 6, which is general have your say, and I'd like to invite Sir Bob Russell up to the microphone at the back, where he'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. I wonder at the end of my 3 minutes that you could let me know what is the status of the tendering Colchester Board of Garden Community Joint Committee in relation to this committee. Does it have powers that are superior to this committee and does it have decision-making powers? Because if it does, I think that does raise questions, bearing in mind that 2/3 of that committee are not Colchester Borough councillors. And it does affect Colchester quite significantly. I did attend their last meeting on the 18th of July, I believe it was, 18th of July. And Chairman, I don't know whether this committee has been briefed about what transpired at the meeting, what the arrangement is it self-contained, does it report back, what happens? Because on page 24, if members are aware of the reports given to that committee in respect to Salary Brook, I'm not going to talk about Middlewick, 3 minutes is not enough, but just to deal with Salary Brook, there's reference made to the 1.5 kilometre gap between Grinstead, Longridge and the Garden Community Development. And there's an acknowledgement that that is not physically possible if you can have the garden community as well. So therefore, that's is vital that the tree screen beyond the brow of the hill is planted as soon as possible, as soon as decisions are made. So before the first house is built, the whole site is screened. You won't see it from Grinstead and Longridge Park. But what is crucial is that also on page 24, the land adjoining, this is what's said in the report, the land adjoining Salary Brook is sensitive environmental, landscape and topographical terms. Allocation will be harmful to landscape and environmental attributes of Salary Brook and be highly challenging from a technical construction perspective, given the steep topography. Now, bearing in mind that Middlewick ran away because councillors allowed it to run away and didn't stop it at the start, I'm hoping that you at a very early stage will stop that, because this is 20+ acres the University of Essex wants to transfer over the A134 dual carriageway into a highly sensitive area. It would destroy the whole aspect of a country park if you have a 20-acre development, whatever. What was interesting, Chairman, is that there was a report given to that meeting by Councillor William Sunnocks, a 25-page report. Now, normally, the Colchester Council would spend thousands of pounds on consultants, and you got this one for free. And I think, Chairman, that this committee, A, needs to walk the site and see what is potentially going to be lost if 20+ acres goes for development, just the other side of Salary Brook, but also to read the searching questions, the observations, the suggestions that Councillor Sunnocks has put in this. It was dismissed in 30 seconds at that meeting, as was really a matter for the officers to answer. I rest my case, but in Councillor Sunnocks, listen and see and read what he's had to say.
Thank you. I can't comment about what goes on, obviously, at other committees because I wasn't there, and I haven't seen the minutes yet, but you've raised some points that I'm sure we can all take away. The local plan committee, and that's absolutely right, the Councillor Young speaks because she'll have a lot of local knowledge of what's going on, as Grinstead is her ward. This committee is completely separate. This committee governs what happens in Colchester, and that therefore hasn't changed. Obviously, the other committee reference is a collection of the councils coming together to talk about the more strategic elements of that development in that part of Colchester and beyond, of course, because it is exactly what it says on the tin. It is the Colchester borders and into tendering, and that's exactly what that committee will be doing. So I can't comment because I wasn't there. I'm sure Councillor Sunnocks would happily send his report around. He may choose to comment or ask you a question, but certainly I'm happy to go to Councillor Young because I'm sure she's got some valid things to update us on.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Bob. We were both at the committee together. Yes, Councillor Sunnocks had made that report available to me, and I had, shortly before the committee, made that available to our officers. So, you know, in my mind, the report will not be dismissed, and I think I referred to it on the night, especially around the business advice that I think we do desperately need, which we probably don't have within the confines of the council. With relationship to your comments about Salary Brook, I think what I took heart from personally was that there was a uniformity of opinion that felt that option B was not suitable because development came halfway down the slopes. I don't think we're there in terms of the proposal, and as my understanding is, officers will now go away, look at all the representations and come back with some further proposals for us to consider. I think it's probably right that officers actually clarify the governance arrangements in terms of the decision-making process around this, which they'll have a better handle on perhaps than any of us here. So, yeah, I suggest that Chair, we get Karen or Sandra to cover that off, so we're all clear on those points.
Thank you. Councillor Sonic, yep, happy for you to just come in.
Yes, first of all, I took a walk around Salary Brook and it really is most attractive. I think it's a little hidden jewel for Colchester, and this public access isn't particularly good. And there really is something that can be done there. And certainly I support Sir Bob when he says you shouldn't be able to see the development from the attractive bit. As far as the joint committee is concerned, I think they're writing the minutes before the meeting. Perhaps that's a scandalous thing to say, I don't know, but it certainly didn't seem to have any of the gist of the themes that I was trying to introduce. There are two major problems. One is they've done a DPD, which actually goes backwards on the local plan stuff. Roger Clues was much more incisive than the DPD, so we need to tighten up on that. And the other thing is the business problems the business side is lagging far behind the planning side. And so I'm very happy. I've suggested some names as suggested by Karen Syrett at the briefing the other day of people who could help the councils get ahead on that. So yes, but I think when the next meeting comes up, we should ask whether the minutes are a true record, because they didn't seem to, cover the key points.
Okay, thank you. That was very helpful. And I believe Karen will come in as well, just to offer some clarity.
Yes, thank you. I hope you're reassured, Sir Bob, from what Councillor Sunnox has said, in that we are listening to the advice and the comments that he's put forward, and others, in fact, have put forward. In terms of governance arrangements, the joint committee is tasked with making decisions for that specific area, not anywhere else within the borough, soon to be city. But it will be our full council that makes decisions on whether we go out to consultation, whether the plan gets submitted, whether we adopt it, things like that. So we've still got that hierarchy, in fact, more of a hierarchy than we have with this committee. And in terms of the minutes, I agree, tendering do take a very different approach to us. Their minutes are much shorter than us, and you might have noticed that Councillor Luxford Vaughan asked for her comments when she spoke to be noted or recorded in more detail, and it's for that very reason she has raised her concern that they don't accurately reflect the meeting. So it is something that I will report back on again.
Thank you. Anything further, Sir Bob? You've got another minute if you wish to clarify a question.
Chairman, I'm grateful for all those responses. Thank you very much indeed. The point I wanted to stress above all is to get removed as soon as possible any reference to crossing over the dual carriageway and A road with a development of 20 or more acres of development, which would totally destroy the whole aim and objective of a country park. And I'd rather that removed sooner rather than later, because as with Middlewick, once it gets stuck in there, it proved impossible to remove. And let's get it removed ASAP. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Bob. We'll certainly take note of all your comments, and certainly I do recall having been on this committee for many years on and off the 1.5 kilometres and all that was said about that many years ago. So yeah, that resonates. Right, thank you. There's no other have your say speakers at this particular moment. There are later in the meeting. So we'll go straight on to item 7, which is the infrastructure audit. And in fact, we have Nick Chilvers to speak on that infrastructure audit. So Nick, if you'd like to come up and have your 3 minutes, that would be great. And a good choice of shirt colour as well to match the chair.
It's passed me by. Otherwise, I'd have changed. Infrastructure audit. Good. completion by autumn. That looks a bit of a tall order if done thoroughly. You've listed on the agenda subject areas to audit and reports to reference, and some of these are dated 2015. Now, things have been moving fast, haven't they? And not always as predicted. 5.4 and 5.6 say you'll be collating up-to-date evidence and working with colleagues from other agencies. 5.8 say you'll be relying on evidence from providers rather than perceptions. Yes, perceptions can be unreliable. And we all know that experts' figures don't always add up either, do they? Now, some providers will paint a picture that suits them because they don't want to invest. Others simply won't engage properly because they do these things in their own time. And often the public just don't do what the private provider expects or wants them to. You should look carefully at providers' reports and predictions. Are they backed up by facts on the ground? And I'd like the panel to consider this way forward and involve. We've got 51 ward councillors and a number of parish councillors. Any of them worth their salt will be able to list satisfaction or concerns on each and every category. They know their areas best. They get the brunt of the public feedback. They know where the roads lack capacity. They know about the pressure on schools and doctors' surgeries. They know whether the play and open spaces meet community needs. Why not write formally to each of them for a short report on infrastructure in their ward? No need to make a meal of it. Draw up an easy pro forma. They can ask the public for views via their local Facebook page and newsletters. It's not hard to set up, surely. This is an obvious subject where local knowledge is needed to compare and challenge the predictions from remote public bodies that will send in a desk-based report. Let the councillors get stuck in. Surely not too much to ask for them to seek an opinion from residents and feed them with their own thoughts into the debate. Of course, some responses will be unrealistic, but you look for the weight of sensible points coming through. In my opinion, the audit report should reference councillors and public feedback. It might slow things down a bit, but so what if the result is more reliable? Can you think of any councillors who wouldn't want their ward to have their say on this important topic? We've got 9 here. Who would want to stand aside? This is for the panel. What do you think?
Thank you for that. We'll obviously pick up in Karen's report, I'm sure, some of those points in more detail, and I'm sure councillors will have quite a lot to say on this because it's so important and it is something that has been brought here because councillors have been asking for it. So I think we'll pick up those points.
Sorry, will I be getting responses from panel?
So you've raised
can I have
points.
a response from panel members too?
Yeah, so I think all the points you've made will come up in the discussion tonight, and I think we will obviously cover that. But if anyone wants to answer or let their thoughts be known, I'm sure I know what Councillor Summers is going to say, but very happy for you to ask questions or to make comment. Councillor Summers, please.
Yes, I think that's a vital point, and I think the whole council needs to get engaged in this subject. I think that the starting point, though, what you're suggesting is what I call a bottom-up approach, whereas you look locally and you see what is perceived to be needed. But what we're trying to, what I feel we need to do is to develop an absolutely sound basis for money raising. And I've listed out in a little report I did 6 different ways in which it would help. It's Section 106 negotiation. It's if we do a SIL project, it will form a basis for that. It would inform a revision to the Section 2 plan when we come to do it. It would inform negotiations in relation to the garden community. And it would help us with the case for central government, but departments for grant funding, and making the wider case for infrastructure investments. So there's a lot of top-down stuff that we need to do, and then that needs to meet the bottom-up stuff. And we need to. This needs to be one of the council's major tasks, is to get the infrastructure to catch up with the housing we've had.
I'll withdraw. I'll let you talk it through.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we'll obviously put your points in, but I think Councillor Sunnox has summarised that quite well before the actual report has been presented. But Karen, if you want to present the report. All right, so there's also a statement from Lee Scordis that we need to read out as well, as he can't be here for some reason.
Sorry, Chair, that did come in very late, so
Okay.
that's why it's scrawled rather than typed.
Okay.
So if I would just find the statement from Councillor Scordis,
Must have been at 1 minute to 6 or something.
very close to it. Chair. So dear panel, I had hoped to join you in person today, but unfortunately I have been severely delayed by a late train. I wanted to raise the issue tonight on infrastructure in the south of Colchester and asking for us not to be forgotten. For the residents in the south, the main direction of travel, especially in the southeast, is to head north. It's where jobs, the city centre and the train stations are. As it stands, the current road infrastructure is struggling to cope while the bus network is inadequate. The south has changed dramatically as there are fewer jobs available than there have been in past decades. We constantly talk of a future tram system linking east to west Colchester, but south to north is rarely hinted at. Instead, the majority of traffic is forced up a very narrow bottleneck on Mersey Road or onto the flooded Haven Road. Moving forward, it is vital that the local plan committee do look at future potential bus routes for the new communities being proposed in the recently approved local plan. However, infrastructure is not just roads. It is also schools, GP surgeries, community centres and play parks. The Hythe is a perfect example of where we have failed on infrastructure. Apart from a community centre, there is little else here. It's almost a stopgap between Newtown and Greenstead and has become nothing more than a dumping ground for houses. With no infrastructure considered, most of the Section 106 monies from the developments appear to have gone elsewhere, while the flooding of the Haven Road remains unaddressed. Developments with play parks have at most a swing, a slide, and possibly a small roundabout. They are frankly laughable, and we can and must do better moving forward. On mass developments like we have seen in the Hythe, it is vital that Section 106 money stay in the immediate area to help create a future community. I do hope that you can take my points into consideration during your debate. Councillor Lee Scordis.
Thank you. We can feed that in. So Sandra, you're going to take us through the report, I believe, or is it Karen? All right, will be Karen. Fantastic. We will stick with Karen doing the report.
Thank you. I'll start by saying this is quite an unusual report, I think, for this committee, because I'm asking you to help inform what we're about to do rather than saying this is what we've done or what we're doing. I really want comments like we've already heard and the discussion I've had with Councillor Sunnox before this meeting to help inform the methodology that we use and therefore help inform the outputs as well. This isn't a study which is restricted by national guidance or legislation, so we are free to do what we think is best for the council. The idea at this stage is to provide a baseline for infrastructure within the borough so that we can see what we have and where we have it and where there might be gaps and where any future investment might best be placed. And as Councillor Sunnox has already said, in fact, he's taken half my presentation already, really. There's a number of reasons why this infrastructure work is important. So it does need to be evidence-based, but I do take on board what Mr. Chilvers said, and he should be pleased to hear that in December, I did send out a template to all councillors and all parish councils asking about infrastructure within wards and within parishes to help inform an infrastructure plan, but that really only covered community facilities, open space, sport and leisure. So this is taking it on beyond that, but we certainly value the comments from ward councillors. So I think that is a useful suggestion. We'll also need to involve all those people and agencies that do provide the infrastructure, because there's no point in us saying in a document, right, we need a doctor's surgery, for example, in Prettygate, when we're being told that actually we don't. There's capacity at Ambrose Avenue and there's capacity somewhere else. I've just completely made that up. So, but just to give you an example, but that's what you might hear if you knocked on doors, people saying, well, it takes me an hour to get through to the doctor's surgery. Doesn't necessarily translate into there's insufficient capacity. So we have to really have an evidence-based review of that as well. So the intention is to do some of the work ourselves. We have a limited budget, and I think all councillors would agree we don't want to throw money away. So the intention is that we start off doing some of the baseline work ourselves. And within the report, there's a lot of studies listed, and I acknowledge some of those are out of date, which is why it does need to be updated. But we will, without a doubt, have to involve some specialist consultants in this work, not least to understand what the provision should be. Now, for some things, for example, there's standardised approaches. So I've got a draft report sitting in my inbox at the moment about sports halls. And that uses a standard approach to demand, and then developed by Sport England, I should say. And then it uses a local approach to supply and locational factors. And I've only had a quick look at that report, and the first thing that jumped out at me was it's the east of the borough where the deficiencies are most felt. And that's because of accessibility reasons rather than not having the facilities, is that people perhaps don't own the car to the same levels as they do elsewhere in the borough. So for Colchester, just picking up that, and it is only draft, we have 4.3 courts per every 10,000 people. That compares to the English average of 4 courts. So we're slightly ahead of the national average there, significantly ahead of tendering, where there's only 2-point-something courts. So you can see how we start to develop that, but we haven't got that information for everything. So that's part of the work that we'll need doing. So really, the questions for the committee tonight are, shall we proceed with the audit? Shall we proceed along the lines suggested? Is everything covered that we should be looking at? And I've noticed sport isn't identified in isolation there. It could fall under or link in with a number of the categories, but it's not specifically mentioned. And are you happy with the methodology proposed? Thank you.
So this is very much your chance to influence this, and I have great respect for what Councillor Sunnox has to say, so no doubt he'll be helping us to shape it within reason, and has been, I think. I would suggest youth provision might be a specific title. I know we've talked about youth zones, but I think youth provision has its own heading, although you could argue some of that is covered by sport, but it's much more than just sport. So I think youth provision, unless I've missed it, I think should have its own title. But this is your meeting, this is your committee, and this is your chance to influence this. So as chair, I want to encourage as much discussion and input into this that we will minute and take forward. So I welcome all discussion. So I think we'll start with Councillor Moore, please. I think you were first, and then Councillor Young.
Oh gosh, thank you. Thank you, Chair. The first thing that comes to mind is that there appears to be no mention of the problems. I'm sorry, I'm being very partisan for my ward here, but there is no mention of the particular problems that Mersey and the coastline suffer from. Now, I know that it's easy to say a lot of stuff that happens on the beaches and that is MMO, but somebody needs to tell the MMO that stuff needs to be done. And that is simply not happening. It's, the town council don't seem to want to do anything about it. And it's literally turning, the beach area is turning into a really rundown area with breakwaters all coming to pieces and there's nothing, and the beach is being carried away because there's nothing to stop it. So it would be nice if we could accept that Mersey and its special problems is something that we ought not to take our eye off. Likewise, Mersey, this evening when I tried to come here, the traffic jam, and this was well in advance, that was about 2 hours after the tide, the traffic jam was back into the town centre because one car had broken down in the middle of the Strood, not quite across the white line, but almost. And for at least an hour and a half, people had been trying to get off the island round this because it was well blocked. There is nothing in place to remove any what are in effect abandoned vehicles in the middle of the highway. It would be very simple to do, but it needs the will to do it. Or what we need is a pickup that will just take them away and put them somewhere where there won't be a nuisance. There's somewhere very easy nearby, but it needs to be empowered. No private individual is just going to suddenly start doing this. It needs to be done in a formal, somebody needs to be given permission to do this or license to do it or something, because it's absolutely essential. We're going to have another 200 houses on the island. It's going to get worse and not better. So I would really like, when we're talking about infrastructure, I would like the special problems of an island to be taken into the thinking. That, and I've already spoken to Karen about things like charging, electric EV charging points, which are now becoming more and more needed on, as I say, it is an island, it is cut off for quite often, for quite a few hours of the day. And I say, we need not just to be seen as somewhere where tourists go from somewhere else. It is a living community and it needs help in some things. Thank you.
I just want to try and, I think it's some valid points there. What I don't want this discussion to be tonight is about ward issues. I'm not taking away what you've said, because actually there's quite a lot of gold in there, because we're talking coastline beaches, and that doesn't just affect Mersey, that would affect other places. Dedham would have its own issues, I'm sure, and other places, Grinstead, Mile End. You know, I could talk about the A12 junction 28 is a capacity already, but that's not going to be fixed tonight. So I think there's some good stuff in there. Just in terms of if cars break down, well, that will happen anywhere. It could happen on the A12. It could happen. It could happen on the roundabout at the university. It could happen anywhere, and it would cause problems. Again, it's a valid point to a degree, because anything that happens in Colchester stops. It's like the blood running around your body. If there's a blockage, it will stop, and then there could be a rather nasty catastrophe of some kind from a health perspective. Same as with our traffic network. The whole place grinds to a halt. If it's raining, something crashes on the A12 because all the traffic tries to travel everywhere else. So there is a valid point, but that could happen anywhere, like, is the point I'm making. So I don't want it to be ward specific. I want you to think at a much higher strategic level if we can. Don't think operational, think strategic. Councillor Young.
I will do my best, Chair. I think this will be very valuable to us going forward. And I guess for me, things like utilities and adopted and unadopted drains will be really interesting to look at, and the same with adopted and unadopted roads. So we hope that we will get a good buy-in from our partners, and I'm sure the health sector can give us lots of information about where the pinch points are in terms of GP provision. But once we have that picture, then we're in a better place actually to lobby those organisations, because regardless of whether it's Mersey, Grinstead, Mile End or wherever, roads that are not adopted cause us significant issues to do things about, whether that's getting street lights mended or getting a pothole mended, for example, which is difficult across Colchester. So I look forward to us getting this report, and probably long overdue that we're doing this.
That's some great points there. The unadopted roads and estates is a really good point. I think the other point to think about, of course, is that a lot of estates now are not actually being adopted. I could certainly point at a few where all of the open spaces and playgrounds are going to management companies, and that is an issue in itself, particularly if they're all, well, not all, some are less competent than others, I think is the professional way to put it. And we spend a lot more time dealing with them as councillors. And I was beating one up today about issues they've not resolved or not responded to. It's just common. I think that has got to be taken into account, because that infrastructure in effect is private, but it's still a playground. It's still part of Colchester. So some interesting points. Councillor Kirby Taylor, I believe, is next.
Thank you. There were two things I wanted to raise. The first is that does blue-green infrastructure include things like surface water management, drainage, and things like that? Because we're seeing lots and lots of developments where, because there isn't a crystal clear strategy in place for the drainage, there are developers getting away with, I would say getting away with murder, but they're getting away with literal flooding. And because I don't think that there is enough clear enforcement that we can really hit them with. But that is something that we really need to be looking at, and we need to be making sure we know what there is, what its capacity is, what its future capacity is. Looking forward, and also including Anglian Water in that discussion, because we know that there are already problems with the sewage and discharges into the river, and we need to make sure that we're covering that out. The other thing I wanted to mention has just dropped out of my brain.
Well, do you want a chance to?
Yeah, I'll try and remember what the second thing was.
Yeah, I think surface water drainage, etc., is a really valid point. It is becoming more and more of an issue. It does come up in planning applications, and Anglian Water, a bit like Essex Highways, always tends to say, "Not a problem, Governor. We've got it covered. We've got capacity," when we know that actually in reality they don't, and particularly road drainage as well. So yeah, it's a really good point. We'll record that. Have you managed to?
I have remembered the second point.
Okay.
More general, it's probably not directly infrastructure, but it's something that I feel needs to be considered in the same discussion, is infrastructure maintenance. So if we can understand what maintenance facilities we have, because we have loads of infrastructure, but because it isn't being maintained to the standard it should, it's costing us £10,000, £20,000 to refurbish, refit, where it could just be 500 quid to £1,000 a year for maintenance on that facility. So I think we're not putting enough focus on the maintenance of what we do have. So is it possible to include that, or is that outside the scope of this and needs to be considered in a different discussion?
I think it's a valid point, although you could argue it's very operational. It's not strategic. Maintenance is an issue, and I think it comes back to what I was saying, where councils are taking less and less. That's why management companies are taking whole estates, and therefore residents paying council tax and also paying maintenance charges that go up every year. And that's always the biggest complaint. The bill comes out annually and it's gone up by another 10 or 20%. So I don't know. I think we'll put it in the minutes and we'll have a look at it, but it's not strategic, although it is a valid point. And as we know, Essex has less and less tarmac every year for whatever reason, to put potholes. So yeah, you know, road maintenance is a problem. It's all very well having estates. When they get to 20 years old, you'll see all the pavements are falling apart and they look awful and they won't get repaired. You can see that from older estates. So I think it's some valid points. Any other councillors? Councillor Sunnox, I thought you might be next, and then Councillor Rippingdale after that. So Councillor Sunnox, the floor is yours.
Okay, this is a huge subject, and it could ramble. We could spend a lot of money, and I could see Karen nodding. And I think we owe it to her and officers to make it a controllable task. The whole task is a huge one. It should be one of the major focuses of the council and all councillors, and I agree with that absolutely 100%. But I think that, you know, there's so many things. Is it going to be a rolling review as is suggested in the paper, or is it going to be a job and finish? Are we going to have external or internal approach? Are we looking within Colchester? Are we looking at Colchester as a whole, as its deficit as a whole, or are we looking at the deficits for Tiptree or for Mersey or for Greenstead? And most importantly, is it going to be bottom up or top down? And I'd like to suggest that the exercise at this stage should be fairly much top down. And what I mean by top down is like the Essex County Council did one in 2017 called its Growth and Infrastructure Framework. And I don't think it went very far, and I don't think it was used very much. And Kevin Bentley was certainly surprised to find of its existence a couple of years ago. But it ended up with a figure. There was some huge figure, 11 billion or something, for the shortfall in Essex. And then that was broken down into a lot of different categories. And I think that, you know, we need that top figure, and then the breakdown into categories, and then the breakdown by geography, and then that somewhere meets the bottom up approach. But I think that this report needs to really start from the top down. And I really don't like farming things out to consultants when you don't have to. And in the organisations I'm involved in, we're very, very tight on professional fees. But I do think this is one where we'll need some help. And the reason is that if you go to the NHS and say, how many surgeries should we have? They'll say, oh, well, you've got enough already. You need to come at it with, you know, how many GPs per 10,000 population we got? And how does that compare to the national average? How does it compare to other parts of Essex or other similar boroughs? And those are the type of top-down statistics that consultants are rather good at. Often they've got databases of all that stuff. So I don't think it would be very expensive to involve them. And I think we could get a long way from the top down on that. That would then identify the big figures. The biggest figure, I suspect, the biggest figure for Essex County Council was on transport. And I suspect we'd find that was the biggest figure here as well. And then there was a whole lot of other smaller figures that we'd be attending to, and it would give us a framework and a direction for our argument on 106 and the lobbying. It feed into Bernard Jenkin and Will Quince when they're lobbying in government. And I think it would be very useful. Yes, we should talk to the providers as well, but we should only do it when we've got the stick of those top-down statistics to play with. And so we go at them in. Otherwise, they'll Sir Humphrey us very effectively. Does that give an idea?
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm in agreement. Of course, we must remember the third MP for one part of Colchester, of course, is Preeti Patel for Stanway, which is still part of Colchester. So yeah, that's covered. Thank you. Yeah, some very good points, and I agree with you. Although, let's manage those consultants tightly, otherwise we'll end up with half a big censure joining us or something. Councillor Rippingdale, if you'd like to raise your points, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the categories that are within this report, I agree with most of them, but I do feel like youth provision should be separated out. We've seen huge cuts to youth provision in Colchester, and we've seen rises in antisocial behaviour linked to that. So for me, I feel that's like one of the most important things that we should be focusing on. From my experience, I would prefer to see localized youth provisions rather than a city centric view. So will we be consulting groups like the Essex Youth Service, YMCA, who do provide this targeted youth support already? Because they would be an interesting piece of evidence, I think, of what is actually needed in the town and in each area, because I find that we as adults often make decisions for younger people based on what we think they would like, and actually those are the people who are working closest with those young people. So I'd be keen to understand whether they would be involved in this process. I completely agree with, you know, the comments that have been made around it needing to be evidence-based, but I do feel there's been quite a lot of new councillors come onto the council since that initial template was sent out, and Karen's already been subjected to my ideas for Newtown and Christchurch, but I feel that there could be some new ideas that come through from ward councillors, or even some fresh thoughts from existing ones. And I would think that we've discussed before, this collaborative working needs to increase between officers and ward councillors, and this seems like an ideal opportunity to do that.
Great, thank you. Councillor Effendale, some good points there. Anything else from anybody? It's your chance to influence it and drive it forwards. Of course, infrastructure can include utilities that's mentioned. Good old UK Power Networks putting in a new network to the hospital because they're running out of power. That's why they're spending £1 million on it. So, you know, that's a good example where you know, our energy provision is lacking in certain infrastructure that's like really important. Most people, I think anyone across Colchester has trouble phoning through to a doctor's surgery. You know, and I think that's a common complaint from everybody, being on hold for an hour, or you get the engaged tone before you even get into the IVR queue. That's certainly my experience. So yeah, but I think Karen's absolutely right. You can't judge capacity by a phone bank. You have to see what goes on behind, and yeah, people are stretched, but I agree, the fact you can't get in a phone queue is not necessarily meaning that that surgery doesn't have any capacity. Any other points? If not, Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Councillor Rippindale, for bringing up about the youth provision. Definitely feel that's something that needs to be on the agenda. Also, if we can have in that, also in the agenda, the green and blue structure, wildlife corridors mentioned highly by in reports, but there is no mapping of them and where they'll be maintained or anything like that. So that'll be something great to put in there as well, so we can have a clear, concise where our wildlife corridors are and what would happen to them. Because we had a big fire in Stanway yesterday and lost a part of wild habitation. Who will be responsible for re-putting that in if it's lost? That would be fantastic as well.
If I might come in, this has the potential to grow and grow. I think there's a limit to what this study can do in the first instance. And, you know, I can't say that it's going to solve all the infrastructure and wildlife issues in the borough. What it will do is give us a clear picture, I hope, of what the issues are. And maybe the next stage after that is what we do with that study and how we best use it. So I don't want to raise anyone's expectations, but we're going to produce something which, you know, addresses absolutely everything at this stage.
I agree, it has to be a priority. You know, and everything is seen as a priority, depending on what view you're taking of it. But, you know, we'll feed in as much as we can. But I think Councillor Sunnox was right. And, you know, as a project manager, you have to get your scope right, because if not, you'll deliver nothing and you'll fail. And this is not about failure. This is about trying to fix. I always talk about top 3 issues, right? What are your top 3 issues? What do we need to fix? And then you move on to the next 3. Here we've got about 330. So we do need to be really careful. We have you know, only so much officer time. I know Karen works about 12 hours a day, and other officers do. We don't want to burn our team out, and we only have a limited budget. And I think Councillor Sunnox is right again about controlling those consultants, because we've all worked with them, and before you know it, half your building is filled with them. So again, we need to be very careful. So just an air of caution. And then on to Councillor Laws, please.
Just very briefly, I really like the categories, and I think Where I'm a little unclear, Chair, and you raised it, and as of other members, I'm a little unclear about what we really mean when we talk about youth provision, because, you know, from what I can see, sport, culture, having buses that would get people home after 5:30, that type of thing, that kind of infrastructure is what we need, which will benefit young people. And I don't know, feel free to elaborate. I'm not clear on what we're really getting at when we talk about youth provision, because I think that the broad categories there seem to tick certainly a few boxes, but perhaps I just need some education. So please feel free.
Yeah, no, I think I was the first one. I'll take the prize for being first. I did mention youth first, and then two other councillors mentioned it. I think it deserves its own category because it is an issue across the town, and there is antisocial behaviour growing. I mean, I'm getting the youth shelter taken out in Mile End, believe it or not, because it's been the bane of residents' life. I've had 2 phone calls about it tonight already. So that's going. It's going to get angled ground out, and I'll be on the end of it. So I think it does. I mean, Councillor Rippingdale wants to come in with any more thoughts. Happy to take that, but also thinking about it. Police, that is infrastructure in some degree because they uphold law and order. That can feed into youth provision, and you know. So I mean, how far do you go? But if you speak to the police, they won't have enough infrastructure. But there you go, Councillor Rippingdale. If you want to add a bit more granularity to that, that'll be grand.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sector that I see every day because of my job. There isn't enough safe spaces for children to go to. You know, we can provide, you know, basketball courts, that type of thing. But in the winter, that's not safe for them to be in. You know, it's similar. We've had issues with our shelter and I've had to take the sides off the one on the wreck. But for me, it's very much about working with agencies such as the YMCA, the Youth Service, to provide safe spaces for these young people to go to. You know, we're seeing increases of mental health concerns in this age group. We're seeing increase of antisocial behaviour, county lines, and it's great that the townhouse is getting this investment. But when I'm going to use when I was young, you know, I was very fortunate to live in Stanway because there was a youth centre there, and we're relying too heavily on volunteers to provide those services when teenage lives are becoming a lot more complex. They've got a lot more pressure on them, and I think they need much more specialist support in terms of the right youth workers and the right support services. And that's primarily what I mean about youth provision, is that those safe spaces and us being prepared as a city centre to have those.
Yeah, and then you can obviously argue it does go into the other youth stuff that we've talked about that is quite expensive. And interestingly, the YMCA are looking to start the youth club back up in Mile End. We've got them full funding, all paid for. The problem is they can't find anywhere to run it properly all the way through the year. So that's what's stopping it happening. So, you know, so I do agree that it deserves its own title. We might just need to scope it properly. Councillor Sunnox.
Yes, very briefly, in terms of keeping the scope moderate, this should be focused on capital investment needed.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, that's a really good point, actually. And that almost breaks down your strategic versus operational piece that I said at the beginning. I think that's been well discussed. We'll have Councillor Young as the last speaker, because we don't really want to be here till 11 o'clock, although this is important. But Councillor Young will make you the last.
I'll keep it short, and I suppose it's going back to what Councillor Sunnox was saying about what Essex did. And of course, we know why they did that, because that was about them wanting to take over the world. And, you know, I'm not making a particularly anti-ECC point here, but when they quantified what they needed, then they could make the argument for SIL. So when they said, oh, we've got a deficit in early years provision, for example, then they can make their pitch for that funding to come from the SIL. And I think, you know, here in Colchester, Chelmsford took a slightly different attitude to SIL, but we have as a priority affordable housing in the borough. And so we have not wanted to go down the SIL line, but Essex were pushing very hard at that. And that's where that sort of analysis came from and was behind that. And I suppose we could be clever on a local level and think, well, what do we want to get out of this, really? And so we shape and give more emphasis on those areas that we think, like you say, the top 3 things that we need to resolve. We need to be clear about, you know, what we need to solve most, I guess, from this report.
Thank you. I'm not going to give that top 3 because we'll probably be debating that for the rest of the evening. So I think, Karen, I'll hand it back to you if that's okay for any further thoughts or next steps.
Yeah, I think that's all been very useful. I think that's helped me clarify a bit about what is youth provision as well. I'm glad Darius asked the question, because apart from what I've heard about the youth zones, I was perhaps struggling a bit. I think I'd have just stuck it under community facilities, but I can see there might be a distinction there. But there's been quite a few other useful comments. It's feeling more to me as if we need the consultants rather than me to do it. Certainly, maybe to kick it off, or maybe to get those benchmarks. So, or perhaps a two-pronged approach. So we do some of the baseline data gathering, and they do some of the more national sort of KPI setting and that sort of thing that Councillor Sunnox was talking about. So if you're happy, I will take it forward on that basis, but provide updates, or if I prepare a brief, circulate it. I don't think it needs to come back to a committee, but circulate it to committee members for comment.
This is unusual and I don't normally allow it, but I believe you wanted just to raise something very quickly, Mr. Chilvers. It's because you've got a pink shirt on like me, so I'm feeling generous.
Great minds and so on. No, I was just indicating to ask if I could have my 1 minute follow-up.
Yes, you can.
Can I just say that was interesting. I was heartened to hear what Ms. Syret said, and some assurances that councillors and parish councils will be contacted, and they should be. Don't freeze them out. Let them do some of the work. What they put forward will be fairly informal, but you can hold it on file, and when the stuff comes in from the other bodies, just lay it alongside and see whether there are any sort of major differences, and then you probe. I did say don't make a meal of it, but on the other hand, don't keep the councillors out. I'm sure most of them want to chip in. Having said that, I'll leave it with you. Thank you.
I'm trying to wrap this up. So there's 2 councillors that have just indicated, can you keep it quick? So Councillor Arnold and then Councillor Moore, but do keep it brief, please.
Just going back to provision of the youth, we also have the other end of the spectrum, the elderly, and maybe we could put them in as well, because they have special needs and provisions that we need to take care of as well.
Yeah, it's a valid point. That is a valid point. We do have an ageing population. Councillor Moore, if you
Yes,
just
thank you for your
sum up.
patience. If you don't ask the question, you don't get the answer. And I look at this list of categories, and unfortunately, I'm one of these people, I can look at a list and I can't work out what's missing. But there must be stuff missing on there that we just haven't thought of. Presumably, other areas do infrastructure surveys, and somewhere or other there must be several examples. Really, just I'm saying, can we check that list against what other people are doing, just in case something quite important has been missed off. We're all sitting here thinking of our own personal issue, and because, as I said, if it's not on the list, you don't ask the question, so you don't get an answer. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, it's a good valid point. I think we've all come up with a couple of extras tonight, which will get added around wildlife corridors, youth, ageing provision as well. And if we've got consultants working on this, I'm sure they will also point out anything that we may not have thought about. And I'm sure Councillor Sunnox may have a eureka moment, given his background as well. But I'm quite confident between us, we've got a very good comprehensive list at this stage. And if anything else comes up, I'm sure Karen will raise it that I'm happy to move forwards based on the discussion and the report, to let Karen come up with employing consultants, getting input from councillors, etc. In fact, let's just go back to actually what we're agreeing, so it's not woolly. So to agree the methodology for undertaking the infrastructure audit, I think we've done that, and we'll have a vote on that, I think. Okay, all those in favour? Good, thank you, everybody. Good debate. Yeah, yeah, everyone's in favour, so that's very helpful. Thank you. Right, we go on to item 8, which is the supplementary planning guidance. Let's just have a look. There are no speakers on the subject, so we can go straight into the report, which is Sandra. So if you'd like to take us through the report, please. Oops.
Thank you. This report is for members' information and serves as a reminder to those who've been on local plan committee for some time, and for information for those newer members and those new to local plan committee, giving the full range and extent of other guidance which supplements the statutory development plan, and as such is relevant to considering planning proposals and providing extensive policy advice. The report essentially provides a brief roundup of what currently exists, what's been identified already for review or update, new areas or topics identified where there's a need for further guidance, and topics and areas which need to be considered further to establish whether they're still relevant or whether they require review. And also a summary of other guidance which provides advice and information but isn't adopted as supplementary planning document. I won't run through them all as they're all identified in the report, and there's a lot of them. But it's worth highlighting a few areas which are identified as priorities. The local development scheme covering the period between 2021 and 2024 currently specifies the supplementary planning documents that are to be prepared in the next 3 years. Those for planning obligations, affordable housing and self and custom build housing and specialist housing all commenced work in 2019 or a little earlier probably, and were subject to a consultation on the draft which ended in March 2020. Due to the time it was taking for the local plan to reach its conclusion, it was agreed to pause work on these until the local plan was fully adopted. So they need a refresh and an update and further consultation in order to progress them towards adoption, but significant work on these has already been undertaken. There's 2 further SPDs identified in new subject areas that we don't currently have them for, on climate change and sustainability and biodiversity, which are identified as priorities in the local development scheme due to the increased focus on those topics that's risen the agenda in recent years. Further guidance is required. So updating some SPDs that I haven't mentioned may coincide with other work priorities, which may present opportunities to review and progress updates. For example, car parking through work that's being carried out at a county level through the Essex Planning Office Association, and also the cycling SPD through work through the active environment agenda in the local delivery pilot. So as we consider future work programming, further need for review will be assessed continually, and updates on new SPDs identified accordingly. And finally, the report also lists the full extent of other guidance which is still relevant and may be reviewed or added added to as the implementation of the local plan is taken forward, SPDs are reviewed and neighbourhood plans are further progressed. Thank you.
Thank you, very comprehensive. Any questions, points that you'd like to ask Sandra? Councillor Sunnox.
Sorry, I seem to have an awful lot to say today. I'll try to keep it brief. My question is, do we really, I'd really love to see the council concentrating more on the infrastructure and the delivery side of things and pivoting itself towards that and away from rule making. And so my question is there an urgent need to do these SPDs? Do we really need to rewrite them? Will the old ones still work? What's actually driving us to do it? Looking down them, the one that the biodiversity net gain seems to be one where there's extreme uncertainty. A market should be developing in biodiversity net gains units and so on, but no one can make it work because no one knows quite what the rules are. But even that one, do we really need to be leading on that one? Can we not wait until some other councils have figured out how to make that quite complicated area work and then copy them? I'm just really trying to say, can we think of ways of working smarter, not harder?
I don't think it's probably each SPT I would answer that question differently. I think there are some that clearly do need to be updated. One example I would say is the affordable housing one. The current affordable housing SPD is linked to a target which has now been changed in the new local plan. Some of the guidance in it, we are still able to apply it, but it will be a lot cleaner and a lot smarter if it coincides with the adopted policy and responds to the most recent evidence. I think there are some areas which it is a question of what comes first. We've been talking about infrastructure and some of the work that we've agreed to be doing on that. It may be that some parts of what was a very, very broad planning obligations draft SPD may make sense to wait until that work's been done. But there may be some aspects of that may need updating more expediently, but I think we need to look at it as part of a bigger review and actually talk to our development management colleagues and other partners as to the extent to which they also feel they need them now or could wait. And the new areas, climate change, sustainability, I think they are a priority, and the biodiversity net gain. I agree, we're all battling with the same issues. There may be things we can learn and others may get there quicker than us, but there's also an argument for looking at that along with the local nature partnership and looking more broadly with the county as well. But they're all going to take time, but it's prioritising to make a start, I think. Sorry, that was a long answer, but.
Councillor Sunnox.
Yes, good. That sounds like the right approach, particularly the area that I know best, of course, is the Section 106 and the planning obligations thing. And, looking at the Essex County Council Developers Guide and the rules, I feel the rules are there and that we should concentrate in that area on applying them more rigorously. And then the changes will come out of the infrastructure audit. I mean, that's exactly why we're doing the infrastructure audit, so we can justify a stiffer policy, and we'll know when we're having an effect, which is when the development land prices start falling. We'll know when we push too hard, when it gets known that there isn't much uplift to be gained when you want to build something in Colchester.
Yeah, I think there's some good points. I think Sandra gave a very comprehensive response, and I do agree that it is about prioritisation. We talk about top three. That's going to be our buzzword on this committee this municipal year. What's the top three? And I think it's for officers to decide the priority with our guidance of what we think is important. I do think the climate change stuff is of utmost importance. So I think Sandra's response there was bang on. But I think some of the other stuff you've suggested could be of lesser priority. Yeah, absolutely. Leave it on the to-do list a bit longer and dust it off in the future. We have Councillor Moore, then we have Councillor Laws, then we've got Councillor Young in that order. If I've missed anyone, I apologise, but that is the order, please. So Councillor Moore, and then Councillor Laws, and then Councillor Young.
Thank you. Will the government's levelling up agenda, which appears to be rolling in quite fast, it's definitely coming over the horizon, and I'm afraid I have not read it in detail, but I gather there's quite a lot of it that affects planning in the home counties as well, you know, and East Anglia, not just in the far north. Will this be radically altering or affecting the things that we have decided we want to do and how we want to do it? So will we have to change our position, do you think, in the next 3-5 years?
I'll start with an answer. I think Karen may want to add. I think the devil's in the detail, and it's still yet to come. I think anything that fundamentally changes will be a long time coming. We've got a recently adopted plan, and the whole basis of doing supplementary planning guidance is really to add value to the areas in that, policies in that plan, and who knows the detail of what may come in the future. But so I think my view is that we need to work with what we know we've got and address what may come in the future when there's more certainty about that.
Karen?
Thank you. Yes, there are some changes likely. At the moment, we don't know timing for a lot of those. I think I did a report for the last committee, or there was a report for the last committee which set out some of the headlines from that levelling up paper, or the headlines on the planning side of things. So the consolidation of section 106 and SIL, for example, although it's not quite as straightforward as that, it turns out, that will obviously impact on the planning obligations SPD. So that might be another reason to sort of push back further back until we know, although I've been saying that for years in relation to SIL. There's supplementary plans being introduced. I think they will replace supplementary planning documents, but not sure if that, I can't recall, I should say, whether that means that they'll be subject to examination in the same way a local plan is, or whether the details are even published for that as yet. But I think Sandra's right. You know, we can't sit and wait on everything. So there's no telling when certain things will come forward. So I think it is a case of getting on with the priorities now and taking them forward. There'll always be transition arrangements, she said, famous last words, but generally which we can rely on.
Thank you. Councillor Summits, you'll have to come after Councillor Young, because there is a pecking order of people that put their hands up. So Councillor Laws, you're next, please.
Thank you for the report. And Sandra, Simon, Karen, thank you for taking forward the point that I raised last year about updating our archaeology SBD. So 5.24 in the report references how we will have an updated, hopefully an updated set of words in the autumn of this year, specifically around mosaics, the Roman mosaics. I think there's been a lot in the media nationally about this lately because of the one that was discovered in Leicestershire in the Farmer's Field, the one that was discovered in Southwark, and I think we have a really exciting opportunity in Colchester, particularly inside the city walls, to have some clear guidance in place for what happens when you uncover a Roman mosaic. Do we protect it in situ and pour sand and concrete over it for another 100 years, or do we, as I think and I hope that all councillors and officers would agree, do we try and interpret it so that people can see it? And that might be difficult because it might be within a private building. But that said, underneath Bloomberg in the city, you've got the Mithraeum. Underneath other buildings in the city, Roman amphitheatre. And we have had an example in Colchester where through doing it off their own back, opposite the castle, the Roman arcade in the building that's sadly currently inaccessible, but the glass floor treatment there is superb. And if we can do that type of thing incrementally, you know, Colchester will have a very different feel about it, and will feel more Roman, and that's what we should be doing. So I really look forward to the work on it. It's a difficult one. I can see how some developers might not appreciate particularly robust set of words telling them what they need to do, but you've got my full support. Crack on.
Yeah, thank you. Some good points there. Councillor Young, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to comment on 5.32 of the report, which is Shopfront Design Guide, and it won't be any surprise to Karen and Simon because I've been emailing them on this point over the last week. And I think, there's any number of priorities, Chair, but I do think the survival of the high street is got to be up there as one of our priorities. And I think with city status, we need to feel and look a bit different. And I would really appreciate the committee's support for going hard on the sort of accelerator with trying to upgrade the way shop fronts look in the town. I've been sent Article 4 directions, which Bury St Edmunds take advantage of. That's about, having some kind of distinctive Colchester feel to the high street and the surrounding roads. I know we would need to work with other organisations like the BID get them on board with this proposal, but I think we've got it in there as an SPD. It's long overdue, 2011, and we need to be looking different as a city. And I think that could start with a distinctive style for our shop fronts. Of course, there's going to be Tesco's logo on it. We get that. But the colour and design and the way it looks at the moment, we have bright pink sitting next to lime green, sitting next to orange. We've got various men's haircuts. I'm sure you need lots of inspiration over haircuts, but I've seen too many pictures of men's haircuts displayed and plates of curry. And I think we need to try and row back on that kind of approach and look to our shops and make it look a bit more prestigious.
Yeah, I think you speak a hell of a lot of sense on this. I think if you visit some other towns that are more conservation or heritage focused, places like Starbucks can't put up a Starbucks sign. It has to be black or the background is different. So it looks much more nuanced with the look and feel of the town. And this is actually reminded me, the biggest thing that really gets up the noses of our shopkeepers in the town is blinds, is security. And I think this policy dictates it. And I know we've had a few emails over the years where I think the blinds have to go on the outside of the shops, or it's the inside. And that, I think, puts more cost onto the shopkeeper. But also, of course, their window is then still there to have bricks thrown through it. And we, as we know, glass is expensive. And I do know that policy comes up for challenge from shopkeepers, because we say the blinds have to be on the inside because of heritage, etc. But that also means that our windows of shops get broken quite regularly in certain shops where people get drunk and seem to fall into them somehow. Don't know how, and then they get broken. So that is something else I'd like to feed in as a bit of a challenge from our very hard-pressed shopkeepers that obviously have to pay a lot of money, and of course their insurance is affected by it, because the insurers, working in insurance myself, they will either load their premium or they will up the amount that they have to pay before the insurers will pay out or not pay out at all. So that is just something to feed in, but responses from officers on those points as well.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think the point that Councillor Young raises is very relevant, both to the fact that we are transitioning from a town to a city, but also in terms of a more unified management approach to the town centre, both in terms of the design guidance for shop fronts, which is clearly very important, but also I think the fact that Councillor Young is alluding to a much more holistic management regime, including the painting of buildings, and various other matters which relate to the public realm and how people perceive our town centre. And I think it is very relevant. We are obviously working on the master plan at the moment for the town centre, which will contain detailed design guidance within it, particularly for the core. So there will be a very strong foundation there to take forward, but certainly the shopfront design guidance is due for an overhaul. We have had very mixed success over the years with appeals on shopfronts, I have to say. It's not always been entirely successful. I mean, there are examples across the way here of matters which you know, none of us like to see, but certainly the more we can achieve a unified management regime for the town centre, the more we can deliver those very positive outcomes we're all seeking for prosperity and well-being of our communities.
And of course, one of the other issues is lighting and signage. That's another thing that comes up, but certainly the security protection, I'll call it. I think we do need to feed that into the review as well. I know it's a difficult one because if we have a high street full of metal shutters, it won't exactly look nice at night. But conversely, our nighttime economy is causing damage to shop fronts, which also doesn't look good if they're boarded up or if the shop goes out of business because somebody keeps going into it too often or throwing a brick in it. So we do need to find that balance, I think, of those items. Councillor Sunnox is next.
Yes, just briefly on shop fronts. Speaking as a operator of retail, I've done a lot of it. I think that the more regulation you have, the more it puts you off doing anything. And I know. So what I'd suggest in this case is that this should really come up from the businesses via the bid, and we ought to be listening very closely to what the bid wants. Unless we can come up with a real vision that's going to be distinctive and Colchester born, I'd be worried that the regulation was going to be damaging. Sorry to have a slightly different view on it, but I've just had years and years and years of dealing with regulation on retail. On the sill, going back to the levelling up bill and the sill, we are in a terrible cycle because there's always change on the horizon. And we're always saying, oh, there's no point in doing a sill because they're going to change it. And that situation is, I mean, that some ministers come up with another idea that it should be a percentage of gross development value instead of a flat square metre charge. And I suspect that this might meet the same fate as a lot of other proposals. What we have to do is to articulate our case for raising loads of money from developers, and then we have to storm ahead with doing something effective, whatever the regulation is at the time. And I think once you've got your base case there, you'll be able to flex it for whatever regime is coming along, whether it's Section 106 SIL or some other infrastructure levy that they devise. So I don't think we should let the uncertainty in central government delay our mission to make Colchester a proper city.
Thank you. Yeah, some good points. I think on the shop fronts, they can be quite controversial. So I think we fed in our thoughts, and I think as part of the master planning stroke policy rewrite, we'll see what comes back, because obviously it has to go through committee for approval anyway. So Councillor Kirby Taylor, please.
Thank you. I'm actually coming from completely the opposite way from yourself, Councillor Sunnox, and I think that we need more of these and them to be stronger, because feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but these will form a baseline. These will be the minimum standards, and the market, as we have seen over the last few years, will always tend to the minimum standard. Businesses businesses very rarely go above and beyond. So we need to be pushing them up and dragging them up and making Colchester the best it can be. And these reviews, I think, will pull everything and everybody up. We can't just trust businesses to work for us and to lead the change, because it just doesn't happen. We have a race to the bottom instead of a slow climb up. So, I think that's a fairly fundamental difference of opinion there. So
maybe we should talk afterwards.
I think we should.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have an issue, more of a pragmatist myself, so we take the middle ground. But I think we do need to have a standard without question. There has to be a standard because some of the stuff that's been delivered is frankly dreadful. But I also take on board the point about the cost of business, etc. There is a balance to be had, I think, on that. In order, so Karen first, because she's probably got a very big right of reply, then Councillor Moore, and then Councillor Young, in that order, please.
I have a very short right of reply. I was just going to ask Julie to circulate the photos to members of the committee, because there are some pretty awful examples in the town that I don't think we would want to see, and I don't think most businesses would want to see replicated. So if Julie wouldn't mind circulating them, thank you. It might help inform your discussion.
That's a good point. Thank you. And then Councillor Moore, please.
Thank you. Yes, I'm absolutely with Councillor Young on this. I have for years been banging on that if you look out of the window and see the wonderful, the tops of the buildings, there's some wonderful carvings up there. They are behind these garish fronts. There are some beautiful buildings. Now I hear exactly what Councillor Sunnock says, and I hear exactly what Councillor Nissen says. And between the two, is it possible we could set a standard and provide financial incentive and actually help say, you have done this, you get this prize for doing that. In other words, it would hopefully get past Councillor Sunnock's objection that if they haven't got to do it, they don't want to do it. It would be an incentive rather than a punishment, the carrot and not the stick, I think I'm saying. But yes, we could have a wonderful high street, but for years and years and years, it has been going downhill. It looks like a slum now, our high street, and that's such a shame.
I wouldn't necessarily associate myself with calling it slum. I think, yeah, there's always improvement needed. And the other thing I was going to say is it isn't just about the high street, because you could include North Station, for instance, which is a gateway into the town. We changed it to a conservation area some years ago as part of this committee, and therefore that is just as relevant to there as it is the high street. So I think some good points. Just a quick correction, Councillor Nissen is not actually here, it's Councillor Kirby Taylor, who's that's all right, no problem, no worries. No problem. Good, I think that's concluded all of the speakers. Oh, Councillor Young.
Yeah, no, I happily, I mean, I haven't been doing my own little audit. I've just sort of walked from home here and taken some pictures which I don't find aesthetically pleasing. And I hear what you say, Councillor Sunnock, but you know, we should have some control and ownership of our town centre, and I get it that we need to work with a bid, of course, and we don't want to drive anyone out of business, but really, you know, by stopping people putting pictures of pizzas in the window, is it going to stop people buying a pizza from them? I doubt it. And you know, Councillor Moore's made the right point. You know, if you look at where the Co-op Bank is, for example, if you look up, it's beautiful, the architecture above it, but underneath it's got really very poor quality shops underneath in terms of their look and style. So you know, a report I kind of saw the other day, which the most beautiful town centre roads or something, Turnpin Lane, Greenwich, for example, was identified as a beautiful street, and it is all shaded in muted tones. So it's, you know, it's grey, it's a bit of black, it's some white and everything, but it is not sky blue pink. And I think that's what I'm getting at. You know, if we could get some standardisation and distinctive quality to our shop fronts that had some uniformity across the high street, it would just look so much better. But I'll definitely circulate the pictures and you'll see what I mean.
It's a shame that removing pictures of pizzas won't stop people dropping it on the floor on our glorious high street. Councillor Rippingdoe, you just wanted to close this off for me?
I just wanted to make the point that we already do have an area of town that does standardise their shop fronts in Red Lion Walk. So there is precedent here to do this, and actually it is a very attractive shopping area. Also coming from a background of retail, I understand Councillor Sunnock's concern that some retailers would not follow suit. However, I do think that these smaller businesses have adapted to a standardised shop front, therefore some bigger businesses should also follow suit, given that they have been abandoning our town centre as well. I think that we need to reinforce that our town centre is of a certain class and quality, and that they'd be privileged to be here.
Yeah, some good points. Couldn't think who you were mentioning there. Right, this report is only for noting, there's no voting, but if we can note that, I think it's bringing some good points, particularly on the shop fronts. We'll move on to the next agenda item. There are 2 left. So item 9 is the guidance note on permitted development from Simon. So unless there's any speakers, which there are not, we'll allow Simon to just take us through the guidance note.
Thank you. Good evening, members and Chair. Just to really set the scene for this, we had a recent review of our scheme of delegation within the development management regime. So the planning committee extended the scope of permitted development of the scheme of delegation to encompass a greater degree of items which were potentially permitted development. Permitted development comes in 2 forms, namely operational, that is doing and building things, and permitted changes of use. Within those categories, there are 2 potential modes of trial, if you like. One is that there are very specific conditions within the general permitted development order, which, if they are met, automatically grant permission for that use or that development to take place. Alternatively, there is a system whereby the applications are required for prior approval of certain elements of the proposed development. They may or may not involve public consultation, but this is extremely difficult for the public and indeed members and indeed staff sometimes to grasp exactly what requires consent and what is the process. So the purpose of this note is to seek to set out simply what are the considerations in some of the most popular categories of permitted development, and in those instances what the considerations are that the council is allowed to take into consideration in formulating a decision as to whether prior approval is indeed required and whether it is granted for the proposal before it. I'm very happy to take questions, Chair. It isn't a straightforward matter. Permitted development has been liberalised as a regime over the last 10 years to the point where it is extremely complex. I can remember 20 years ago when we were talking about alterations and improvements to dwelling houses and little more beyond, but now we are talking potentially for major changes of use, potentially demolition and indeed rebuild of buildings within the scope of permitted development. And it is extremely perplexing, I think, for members of the public, members and indeed officers, as to how the regime is intended to operate. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. I think, yes, it's a good note that if we agree, will be circulated to educate everybody and including the public. The biggest issue, I think you've noted it in the report to a degree, homes of multiple occupation. They obviously come up as an issue, particularly depending on how many rooms are in there and whether, they change the lounge into a bedroom and all the rest of it, and they have to have higher fire suppressant and everything else, locks on doors, but they cause issues with parking and sometimes behaviour. The other issue, of course, is all new developments, we automatically remove any permitted development rights from them. So even a conservatory or anything similar would have to get planning permission, and that does cause confusion. Because if you live in, say, Newtown, where permitted development is allowed, you can go ahead with a conservatory of certain sizes and things. So even for councillors, you have to think when somebody's talking to you, where they live is important, because you could give them the wrong advice. Given that most of Mile End's all new, that makes it a bit easier really, and probably Stanway to a degree, but that's just my thoughts on it. But happy to open the floor to any comments or thoughts as well from anybody. Or we might all be silent, I don't know. Councillor Kirby Taylor, please.
Just because I've slightly mixed feelings about this, because on the one hand, it is a brilliant idea that we're going to actually give everybody access to all of the information, near enough, all of the information that they need to make these kind of decisions. But I'm slightly saddened by the fact that, as you say, it's become so convoluted and has been changed so much over the last decade that we're going to end up with a lot of people doing a lot of horrible things when they realise what they can actually do. That's not a reason not to do it. It's just a slightly sad note that we are going to have to recognise. Because I support this fully. It's a bit bittersweet.
I take your point. It's not really something we can sweep under the carpet, because this is what people are and aren't allowed to do. I think the point about new developments is quite important, because that does actually restrict what you're allowed to do. Even, you know, what are the two most common things people try and do on new developments? Put on a conservatory, they might do an extension of some kind, or they'll try and remove the garage door and build that to a room if they've got an integrated garage. Of course, that's an issue, because that parking spot, one of them is that garage, although depending on when the development was built, you can't even fit a Mini in it. Or a Matchbox car. So, you know, so there are some things to consider, but I think this is needed and I think it's valid. So I think we can, you know, you can't hide the truth. I think that's the important thing, but I don't disagree. If anyone can really understand what they're allowed to do, you know, the average person in the street is going to have to seek professional advice, normally from councillors, because they get it for free. Any other comments? Come on, Councillor Sunnox, you've got to have something to say on this.
Sorry. Yes, I do. I think we should focus with these things. I mean, the reason the permitted development has become bigger and bigger is because governments realise that planning regulation does huge, you know, slows down the economy. And so I think we need to sort of, it is as it is, but when we're looking at them, we should be focusing on if a development doesn't affect anyone else, then that's fine. And I take your point about garages, but there's a lot of stuff where I feel we're regulating for the sake of regulating. So we should just try and be as practical as we can within the framework that we've got. If it isn't affecting anyone else, if no one has complained, then let it go ahead. And that is what the economy, if we could take that one approach on everything, I think things would move forward so much more quickly. It really is. You just talk to business people all the time, and it's always the planning system holding them up. And that's why permitted development's been put in, and that's why we should interpret it in the right way.
Thank you. Councillor Young, please.
I can't resist going back on that one. I just think that, you know, you're coming from a distinctive perspective, and I think that maybe, you know, others people around the table have a bit of a different slant on that, in terms of we feel that it's too much gone in the favour of you can do what you like, frankly. And we need to try and get some control in planning back. And the pendulum has swung too far the other way. I think, you know, this is quantifying what we have at the moment, Chair. I think we had a really good briefing session. Thank you to officers for doing that quite recently. So all members were much better acquainted what the rules and regulations are in terms of permitted development. But I think, you know, many people say we have a broken planning system. So, you know, I would like to see us having tighter controls, not less controls, personally.
I think there's always a balance and pragmatism to be had on these things, middle of the road.
You just sit on the
Councillor. Well, if it's permitted development, yeah. If not, Councillor Kirby Taylor, please.
Yeah, I think try living in one of the little flats in a converted office block for 10 years and then say, if it doesn't affect anybody else, then it's fine to do it, because that is the real problem with permitted development rights. Stuff that people can do, but only affects them and the people that end up buying their little tiny little matchbox flats. That is the real problem, and that's unfortunately what we're going to end up with more of by putting this information in the public domain. again, not saying we shouldn't do it, but it does feel like
Goodness me, so many speakers queued up. I don't know which one to choose first. Karen, you were just in front of Simon, and then it's Simon next, please.
I was just going to say, we don't have to announce it with a fanfare. It's more for councillors' information as much as anything, because of some of the difficulties they've faced in having to deal with some of these applications, or when they've come in their patch. Probably don't get so many in rural north in terms of office to resi conversions and things like that, but they have been real problems. So you know, we can add it to the website, but we don't have to make a song and dance about it.
I shan't make any comments about the website. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to echo what Karen's just stated. The purpose of this note was primarily for internal consumption for members, to provide what was described by the planning committee as a crib sheet. So when they get irate residents calling them up and saying, you know, what's all this about? So you're telling me I can't really comment, but what am I entitled to comment on? It helps members guide their constituents to actually be able to channel their response to those areas where they can potentially influence the outcome, rather than talking about matters over which we have absolutely no control whatsoever. And I think to answer Councillor Kirby Taylor's concerns, this isn't intended to brief the entire scope of permitted development, particularly around domestic alterations, and indeed it does talk about Class E, the new office to resi conversions and the matters we can take into consideration. But what it isn't there to do is to provide a sort of user guide to the GPDO, which is labyrinthine in its complexity, and does indeed extend to rural north with matters like the conversion of barn groups in the countryside, for example, under permitted development to all sorts of uses, including dwellings and village shops and all sorts of things. You can do some quite extraordinary things now under permitted development. So it was primarily there to provide a support for members and not as a public for really wider public consumption. There are guides out there, but to be honest, even when we're dealing with developers, we often ask them to put in an application for a certificate of lawfulness, because the whole thing is so labyrinthine that it needs to be very carefully considered so that nobody makes a mistake in terms of the process. Thank you.
Councillor Moore, please.
I believe we have certainly talked about doing this. Hopefully we did it. Perhaps if we haven't, we could do it. But we, in fact, as an organisation, try and lobby to have some of the, for example, the office buildings into unsuitably small apartments, things like that. That is stuff that government ought to be going, we've gone too far on this. And it takes organisations like us to keep pushing this. And I believe we did talk about contacting, I don't know, it was our MP or who we were going to write to on the subject or something else. I think it's multiple occupation. I don't know that went off, and I don't know, I don't think it included the basic conditions, sizes of flats and those things that strike us as particularly awful. All these things can be changed in law if enough people want it to happen, and perhaps we should be pushing for that. Thank you.
I mean, that sounds more like a motion at full council to some degree, but whether the portfolio holder for planning can pick that up or whatever might be something. But good, Andrew did do that, yeah, by the sounds of it. Whether we got anything back or not, or a Dear John letter, I don't know, but I think it's a valid point. Right, unless there's anything else, I plan to close this item off. I think it's been a good debate. We're just noting it and agreeing that we're happy with it, and it can be circulated and published as agreed in the report. Everyone in agreement with that, please? Just have a quick check of everybody. Yep, that's unanimous, so we're happy with that. Thank you. We'll now take the final item this evening, which is about neighbourhood planning. There's one speaker this evening who's in the room. There's a statement to be read out. So Robert, if you'd like to read it out from Tasnam, that would be great.
Thank you, Chair. So the statement reads, regarding the neighbourhood plans item that we are now on, that emerging neighbourhood plans, architects and developers, 1/ the neighbourhood plan process. Architects and developers need to be included from the outset. Neighbourhood plans were introduced by the Localism Act 2011 and have remained a political priority locally and nationally. The Neighbourhood Planning Act 2017 ensured further progress in preparing neighbourhood plans. Neighbourhood plans are led by qualifying bodies which are made up of parish councils, town councils, local residents, 21 local residents, or civic leaders or local organisation. They start by designating neighbourhood plan by neighbourhood planning area by applying to the local planning authority. Once the area has been defined and designated, the team will start drafting a plan which involves considerable community consultation. The plans are submitted to an examiner to ensure it meets the basic requirements. After the exam, the neighbourhood plan goes to referendum. If successful, it's formally made by the local planning authority and will become part of the local development framework, LPP and MPEF. 2, the importance of neighbourhood plans in less affluent areas with diverse communities, lower incomes and varied programmatic landscape. Architects and developers can help improve the area. Planning appeals can be recovered by the Secretary of State where there is an application for 10 or more houses in an area with a local neighbourhood plan, demonstrating the importance of neighbourhood plans politically. There is additional protection from insensitive developments where the local community are unable to engage with the planning process. In Colchester, which has 17 electoral wards, seven of the neighbourhood plans that have been brought forward are in affluent areas. Boxted in 2016, Myland and Braeswick 2016, Wivenhoe 2019, West Bergholt 2019, 8 Ash Green 2019, and more recently Marks Day in 2022 and West Mersey in 2022. Areas with a neighbourhood plan led by a steering committee have better urban regeneration results, opening the conversation between community developer, empowering and supporting the local community needs. Emerging neighbourhood plan steering group, all in affluent areas / rural areas include Tiptree, Copford, Great Tay, Great Hawksley, Stanway and Messing have a designated area but no neighbourhood plan. 3, community benefits of neighbourhood plans working with architects and developers. Architects and developers need to be involved from the outset where an area of a distinguished neighbourhood is earmarked for a new development. In areas where the neighbourhood plan and a parish council, the parish can receive 25% of the community infrastructure levy to spend on community priorities in the neighbourhood planned area, providing a clear incentive for neighbourhoods to get a plan together. The Neighbourhood Planning Act introducing extra powers to strengthen the position of neighbourhood plans, making it clear that neighbourhood plans should be a material consideration on planning application. Government encourages neighbourhood plans as all communities can have a greater say on the new developments that are planned. A healthy exchange of ideas and information between resident and community and incoming developers is encouraged by the neighbourhood plan.
Just wanted to check because that's gone over the 3 minutes, hasn't it?
I think it has, Chair, but I haven't been.
No, that's all right. Is there much more to go?
There is 2 more paragraphs in there.
Okay, we'll allow that. I'll just say with statements that come in, they have the same rules as public speakers, so we do need to respect the rules. We'll allow it on this occasion, but in future, if we can make sure the rules are stuck to, I'll let you crack on with that.
So the final part is part 4 on challenges for local preparing neighbourhood plans in less affluent areas. Architects and developers need to be called in from the outset. Neighbourhood planning can be very difficult for local people to prepare as most may not have a professional experience with the UK planning process. Local people, new residents who do not know much about their environment. They may not have come into contact with various neighbourhood plan requirements nor have the understanding of the area. Neighbourhood plans are complex, multifaceted documents and have a robust and detailed technical requirements. Evidence suggests that neighbourhood plans 2012 to 2022 are concentrated in rural and wealthy areas with professionally educated landowners and long-term homeowners protecting their property and neighbourhoods from large developments. Neighbourhood plans need to become accessible to all and tackle those neighbourhoods that are vulnerable and will benefit the most. Neighbourhood plans must include various groups of society in the neighbourhood planning conversation. The local plan needs up to date. It may cover the items from a set period in time. An emerging neighbourhood plan can come forward in advance of the local plan, which was prepared in a different period. An emerging neighbourhood plan needs to look forward, identifying key drivers, working with architects, developers and the community and the neighbourhood to produce the most successful results for all.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you very much for reading that out. Any questions or responses? If not, we'll go straight into the report, which I believe is Sandra. Oh, Councillor Young.
Yeah, I mean, I think the writer makes some really important points about where, you know, we have neighbourhood plans featured and where we don't have neighbourhood plans and why that might be the case. And I think, you know, I'd be really interested to see if there is anything we can do to encourage and support maybe some of the urban areas to, you know, do as Boxted and Mile End and Wivenhoe and Westburg or 8 Ash Green, Markstay and West Mersey have done. There must be equally competent people in the urban areas, but we are not seeing those plans being developed by those communities. And I think, you know, it would be good if we could do something about changing that.
Yeah, I think from having been involved with one myself, I think for one, it's time. And number two, of course, if you haven't got a great swathe of development going on because the development's done, there isn't necessarily a motivation to do it. It tends to be where you are receiving development or you're on the back end of it. And therefore, that's why there wouldn't be a motivation to spend months of years of your life writing this stuff, because it is frankly quite dry but important. And I think that's the point. If you're in a mature area with very little space left to develop, which a lot of Colchester is, they would be more challenging to get the engagement. I think that's, if you look at all those areas that are mentioned, they've all had development not thrust upon them, but they've all had development through the local plan process. And that's what the response will be, that people that do care and are interested, because they're not all parish necessarily always, people will come together and get on with it. And I think that's one of the reasons. Because St John's, you know, there's been talk about doing it in St John's. Yes, possibly because of Bullock Wood, but it's not in the local plan at the moment. So therefore people probably wouldn't feel too motivated to do it, but may do in future. So that's just my take on it. Councillor Rippingdale.
I mean, going back to Councillor Young's point about these inner city areas not having these neighbourhood plans, me and Karen had a discussion about it in the briefing. Is there any support in place that's made known to those areas to start the process? I mean, is it something that's well publicised to those inner city areas?
Sandra?
Probably not specifically, no, not directly targeting communities. I think the key thing is that the desire to do neighbourhood plans needs to come from the communities themselves. There are examples elsewhere in the country where it's usually, picking up on Councillor Goss's point, it's usually triggered by an issue that the community sometimes want to try to stop, but actually neighbourhood planning isn't designed to stop things. It's designed to help influence and shape things and have the community provide their own direction within a framework. I mean, there are examples of areas within the Colchester urban area where there's, if you like, there's substance there potentially for neighbourhood planning to really sort of steer and influence. But if you haven't got those active community leaders who are doing the leading to get groups of people together to get over the first stage of designating the forum and the area to then do the hard bit of doing the work, then, you know, we could do a marketing piece on it, but the whole concept of neighbourhood planning, it comes from the communities and not the council. But that's not to say that there aren't some I think they're really valuable, and I think, you know, it would be great if we had a community come forward that wanted to do something in an urban area, but it's, yeah.
I think we're working under the assumption that the communities understand and know local plan, know neighbourhood plans. I think, especially in Newtown, there would be some appetite for it. There is a strong community base, but I do think we're very privileged in the fact that we sit and work through these things every day. And I don't know if you don't know it, you don't know it. Do you know what I mean? And like you said, it's not about stopping development, and that's definitely the case in Newtown and Christchurch, because there isn't a huge amount of space to develop, but there are a wealth of community assets, and the community is very active in determining how they want the direction of their living space to go forward, but it's not formalized. And I think that's the kind of areas that you need to target in terms of an education around neighbourhoods plans, because I didn't know anything about them until I came into this sphere. So we have to assume that the general population of Colchester is in a similar boat, essentially.
Councillor Moore.
I don't know if all of them are, but I would imagine most of those neighbourhood plans have probably started off by the parish or town council. It's a local organisation, and there will be a group of people there who will be prepared to put in the extra hours and to round up other people to join them. How you actually identify another group, because a lot of these areas, urban areas, do have a group, whether it's the community hall committee or something, but you do have to find, I think, an existing organisation who will adopt the idea and drive it forward. I think that is why it is as it is at the moment.
Sandra, did you want to come back and then we can dive into the report?
Yeah, I think Councillor Moore's point is right, but also I hear what I appreciate entirely what you say. I will just add, I have had one individual pre-COVID, I can't remember exactly how many years ago, from an urban area in Colchester come and talk about wanting to do a neighbourhood plan, and spent a few hours talking through the process, explaining a bit more, and went away very positive and encouraged that there might actually be some development on that. Never heard any follow-up from that individual, despite providing quite a lot of guidance and information, but that's only one example. But
yeah, it's interesting actually what Councillor Moore said. The Myland neighbourhood plan actually started as an independent group of the parish council, and in fact that was a decision that was made by the people involved in it, and it was a mixture of community and parish councillors, and then it did move back into the community council, obviously once it started to get through the formal parts of voting and all the rest of it. But I think we started as a village design statement many years ago, but yeah, I agree. I think it's been an interesting debate, but let's dive into the report. Yep.
Yeah, in fact, Mersey was the same. The seed was planted with the town council, and then I think there was only one or two members of the town council on it, but they had the fingers into the community to bring in interested people. Yeah, there was something else I was going to say, but I've forgotten.
Also, it comes down to money as well, because you do need some funding, and the borough isn't going to be funding it. There's some help, but there isn't a big pot there to start dishing out and start having a ton of neighbourhood plans all over the place, because you've got to vote on it and all the rest of it. Anyway, Sandra, let's get into the meat of your report, please.
okay, thank you. Like Karen earlier, some of the points in my report were covered in the statement that Robert read out, but I will press on anyway. So the report is for members' information, provides an update to remind everybody that neighbourhood plans remains very active in Colchester, and importantly that those plans that are made or adopted also form part of the statutory development plan alongside the section 1 and section 2 local plan. The adopted plans are listed in the report. They've been read out a couple of times already. So I won't go through them again because I think we've heard them twice in the last 10 minutes or so. Work continues on many others. Tiptree working tirelessly, having had the one neighbourhood plan fail an examination, but are continuing and are due to submit a revised draft imminently, to be closely followed by a submission consultation and examination. Cockford and Easthorpe submitted recently, and the consultation on that started and ends middle of September. And then Great Tay and Great Hawksley work continues on their preparation of draft plans. And as was mentioned, both Messing and Stanway have areas designated, but work had stopped on those and is not currently any progress. And we have some neighbourhood plans undertaking reviews. Myland and Braeswick, once again, first off the blocks, and are the most advanced in this and have just commenced a consultation on a draft plan of a review of their neighbourhood plan. And we are aware of sort of thinking and consideration from other of the earlier neighbourhood plans, including West Berkholt, Wivenhoe and Boxted, who are all considering their options and the need for review and the extent of that review. As we've already discussed, all the neighbourhood plans to date in Colchester have been for parished areas, which is very common pattern across the country, where the parish and town councils are automatically the body to take forward the plan, which is known as a qualifying body. And again, as we've kind of alluded to, there are alternatives for these areas, like the urban area of Colchester, where a neighbourhood forum would need to be formed, established covering the area where there's an interest in doing a neighbourhood plan, and the representation of groups needs to be from across the different interests within those communities, relevant to the plan that they wish to pursue. We can advise further if there is any such interest, and would be very happy to do so. So finally, the policy team continue to support all groups undertaking neighbourhood plans. It is quite resource intensive for the small team, but they are very valuable documents when they manage to finally get over the hurdle, and the bulk of the work is done by the dedicated communities. And we also direct them to an enormous amount of resource that's out there to help groups in carry out a huge undertaking. Thank you.
Thank you. So this report, there isn't any vote on it, it's just for noting. So unless there's any other points, there's been a bit of a debate. We'll note it if everyone agrees. Fantastic. Right, well, that brings us to the end of the meeting. So thank you, everybody, and good meeting, good debate, and yeah, safe journey home. Thanks, everybody. Take care.